Alright, our next episode is Skin of Evil. It is episode number 23 and written by Joseph Stefano and Hannah Louise Shearer. The story was by Joseph Stefano and directed by Joseph Scanlon. And plot-wise with this episode, as Counselor Troy is returning from a conference, her shuttle loses power and crashes on Vagra 2. Now when the Enterprise arrives at the planet, an away team of Riker, Data, Crusher, and Yar beam down to rescue Troy and the pilot, and when they reach the planet, they discover a black oil slick that seems to be following them, and it's blocking their path to the shuttle. Well, they realize that this is a life form named Armus, and he's actually a creature formed from the cast-off evil desires and intents of a race of Titans who've actually long since left the planet, but he's still there. And since Armus maintains a force field over the shuttle, Riker and the away team have to negotiate for Troy's release. And when Armus refuses to listen, Lieutenant Yar tries to force the issue, basically, and Armus immediately kills her. Now, Armus then envelops the shuttle as the away team returns to the ship, and Picard basically tells them, we have to put our grief for Yar aside, and we have to focus on the issue at hand. Troy is still in danger, and we need to rescue her. So Picard leads an away team down to the planet to gather more information, and at the same time, Worf, who is now the acting chief of security, notices that every time Armus envelops the shuttle, his power is diminished, and that and the force field over the shuttle is diminished as well. So if it drops low enough, the Enterprise could beam the shuttle crew up and rescue Troy as well. So Armus amuses himself with the away team. He even fiddles with Data and has him pointing his phaser at all the crew. And at one point he even grabs Riker and sucks him down into a black pit. So Picard decides to beam down, and Armus releases Riker. And fortunately, Riker's okay, although he looks like he's in bad shape. And everyone on the away team, except Picard, is allowed to return to their ship by Armus. Now, before doing anything else, Picard actually demands to see Counselor Troy. He wants to make sure that she's alive and she's okay. So Armus agrees to this because he wants Picard to take him from the planet, because those who left him long ago abandoned him. So Picard learns from Troy that Armus's energy drops when she forces him to face his fears, and she talks to him about that. So Picard decides to capitalize this and use the same tactic, and the force field drops low enough to beam Picard, Troy, and the shuttle pilot back to the Enterprise. Now, as the Enterprise leaves the planet, Picard calls the bridge crew to the holodeck, and they finally get to grieve for Natasha Yar. In a pre-recorded farewell speech from Lieutenant Yar, she basically says her fond farewells to all the senior staff, and as everyone's leaving after this service, Data asks Picard, "Did I miss the point? I know we should be thinking about Natasha Yar and her life, but he's overwhelmed by the thoughts that of himself and how he would feel an emptiness without her presence." And he asks Picard if he missed the point, and Picard says, "No, Data, you actually got it." And that's the end of the episode. Now, the original story was written by Joseph Stefano, as I had mentioned, and he had previously worked on The Outer Limits. Hannah Louise Shearer was given the job, basically, of rewriting the original. And the first draft actually had Lieutenant Yar dying earlier in the episode, with the main focus of it being on Armus rather than her death. I think it was smart of them, really, to change that and focus more on Yar's death, because I think the Armus creature is probably the weakest part of the show. It was actually Gene Roddenberry who argued in favor of her dying suddenly, as he thought that was pretty suitable for a security officer. And he also argued against killing Armus in retaliation, because he felt that the Enterprise crew couldn't kill him because it's not up to human beings to make moral judgments on any creature, because they're not God. So that was his basic thought on that. Now, Yar's death actually occurred in the episode after Denise Crosby was asked to be let out of her contract. She was just disappointed with the character thus far, didn't feel like she was given a lot to do, and she asked if she could leave the show, and Gene said okay. Now, actually, Denise Crosby actually said that if she had more scenes written for her, similar to the one she had at the beginning of this episode with Worf, where Worf and Yara actually have a moment, and you kind of wonder, oh, is there going to be a budding romance here between these two? But then, of course, she dies. But Denise felt like if they had done a little bit more with her character that way, then she might not have wanted to leave the show. Now, Yar's memorial service was actually filmed twice. The first was with Denise Crosby reciting the lines while looking straight ahead, which is what the director preferred. However, a version with her looking towards each of the other characters was actually used ultimately, even though the director preferred her looking straight ahead. Now, Scanlon actually said, don't ask me how she knew where they were standing, which is a good point because it just seems like they randomly walk over there. And I think that's why he preferred that she look straight ahead, because how is Natasha Yar supposed to memorize where her mourners were going to stand? Now, Marita Sirtis actually, you can see tears during that scene, and they were actually real because she was cued by Crosby standing off camera, and that helped her a lot with that scene. And I think her memorial service is probably the best part of that episode. I think it delivers the most emotional impact. It didn't do so much for me the first time. I felt it was a little cheesy. But the second time I watched it, I was really moved by it, and I thought it was well done. And maybe it's because I've spent a little more time with these characters where I really felt like I was mourning a loss, as opposed to the first time where I was like, oh, okay, it's kind of cheesy. So it grew on me. I do have to admit that. Now, Skin of Evil was actually not the last episode in the first season where Denise Crosby appeared. Symbiosis, which I reviewed previously, was actually filmed after this episode for whatever reason, but it was aired earlier in the run, so the cast didn't actually say goodbye to Denise after this episode because she had one more. And of course, we see Lieutenant Yara appear again a few years later, and I personally feel like the episodes after her death were improved, and she there was a lot more done with the character, basically, after her death. And I'll leave it at that for those of you who have not seen these episodes and you're kind of following it along with me. But I definitely feel like the best Yar episodes were after the first season. So, yeah, that is basically the episode of Skin of Evil. I don't have much to say about the Armus character because I thought that was kind of a poor part of the episode. It's just kind of a black... He's a black slick, and he says, oh, I'm pure evil. I don't think anyone's really scared by him, and he's not very intimidating, even though he kills Yar. I think I heard a comment by some of the producers that he could have killed the whole cast, and he still wouldn't have been much of a presence there. So I think the Armus part was pretty weak. And so there are a lot of critics as to, Yar being killed so instantly and very undramatically. But Gene really felt, in a line of duty, a security officer can be killed just like that, and it's more real that way. So that's why it was done that way. So it's an okay episode, but memorable because it is the episode where Natasha Yar dies. So that is Skin of Evil. Stay tuned for the next episode, guys.